Ready to go here. Greetings, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. This is the second of our two Reimagine Transit public hearings. My name is Jonathan Keys. I'm the Director of Downtown and Transit-Oriented Development for the Suffolk County Economic Development and Planning Department. Just a few minutes, I will turn it over to our consultant team led by Scudder Wag, who will give an overview of the draft plan and the work that's been completed to date. We will then be followed by a public comment period, and we just ask that all comments will be held until after the presentation. We'll be given the opportunity to have a 3-minute comment.
Video on?
Further, we'll just ask,
Is the video on?
we will mute folks during the course of the presentation just for the sake of the presentation. Scudder, I believe that's it. I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Again, good evening. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you. I am Scudder Wag. I am the project manager and transit planning lead for this project on behalf of the consulting team. I'm with Jarrett Walker and Associates, and with us this evening from the consultant team, we have a number of other folks assisting with this meeting, including Mihir Bosley, who's been an important part of our team developing this plan, and Ricky Angera, who is also with Jarrett Walker and Associates, assisting with the Spanish translation tonight. And from Public Works Partners, we've got Aurelia Hogan and Joel Hochman, who are part of the team supporting the public engagement efforts on this project. Couple of quick housekeeping measures, in particular for folks participating via Zoom, which is most participants this evening. Joel, would you like to give a bit of the background on the housekeeping measures here?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Joel from Public Works Partners. Happy to be here this evening. A few things for those in the virtual meeting who would like to participate, please use the raise hand function and keep it up. We'll take note of those who've raised their hand. We'll put you on the list of speakers, and we'll make sure that we get through to everyone before this evening is done. I think a couple of other things for those who are interested in live captioning. At the bottom part of your screen, you can choose to see live transcript, and also for those who would like to listen to the presentation in Spanish, also at the bottom of the screen, you can toggle back and forth between English and Spanish. So again, we look forward to your presentation or your comments at the end of the meeting, and looking forward to your feedback. Please message me or those at Public Works or any of our team if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Joel. So welcome again. We appreciate your time and participation in tonight's meeting. We will do a review of the work to date on Reimagine Transit, on the Reimagine Transit Initiative, and then introduce the new Suffolk County Transit Network. And then we'll have the opportunity to gather any comments you wish to make this evening and give you more information about how to provide feedback via our online survey and other means, so that you can tell us how you respond to this network. The Reimagine Transit Initiative has been ongoing for about a year and a half now, builds on previous work by, we've got some feedback there. Okay. The Reimagine Transit Initiative builds on previous work done by the Economic Development and Planning Department, including the Connect Long Island Regional Transportation Study and Development Plan and the Suffolk County Mobility Study, the Strategies for Suburban Transportation, which specifically recommended conducting a transit redesign study to consider redesigning the entire bus network for the county, as many other communities across the country have done in the past 5 to 10 years, including large communities like Houston, Texas, to smaller communities like Richmond, Virginia, to even smaller communities all across the country. So this type of study is a kind of thing that many communities have engaged in over the years to reassess their transit systems and their bus networks in particular. The goals of this initiative being looking at the possibilities to redesign the fixed route network and explore alternatives to the fixed route network like on-demand transit, which you're already piloting in the county. And in particular, look at aligning the transit resources in the community and investments in the community with the community's goals and priorities. Suffolk County has changed greatly over the last few decades. The bus network has changed in small ways and relatively modest ways over that time. And many communities find that after 10, 20 years of a network, they may need to think from scratch. You can find out a lot more about the background at the Reimagine Transit website, connectli.org/reimaginetransit.html, and other opportunities to take this survey for this process as we go through. A bit more on our process and our progress to date. We started this process by doing a detailed analysis of the existing network, the existing demographics and conditions and markets and needs for transit in the county. And building on that work, developed two different conceptual alternatives for how a bus network for Suffolk County could look if you emphasized different goals. We brought some key questions as well as those two conceptual alternatives to the public last year to get feedback on which concept people preferred and answer some key value questions about what direction to take a new recommended network for the county. The feedback people provided has directly affected the recommendation. And so based on that feedback, we developed in collaboration with county staff, a draft plan, which we are now here over the last month and in this meeting here to present to you tonight and ask, do we have this right? What are the things you like, dislike, might like to change? From that feedback, then we will revise and update the plan and have a final recommendation later in the late spring, early summer. The intention being that that would then lead to a process of developing final schedules and a rolling out of a new network approximately in the middle of 2023. So some fundamental background I want to make sure everyone starts from is a key piece of thinking about how transit works and what does it achieve. And that is, what is access? Something that we like to call the wall around your life. If we think about a person, any person, we'll call this person Jane, who lives in a city or a town or a county full of possible places they might want to go, represented by all of these destinations in this fictional cartoon. We can measure how far Jane can get in 45 minutes by walking in transit and see this gray bubble of access of the area that she could reach in that time. And 45 minutes is a common travel budget for how far people might be willing to travel for work or a lot of other daily needs. And then when we combine that area that she can reach with all of the things in it, we then have a quantification of her access to jobs, to shopping, to education and destinations, and particularly by being able to count up all of those things, and particularly jobs in that area, we get a good sense of how relevant transit is to her life and to the opportunities she can reach. And this is a really important factor in thinking about the usefulness of transit, because it tells us how much you can actually do with transit. And access is how changing a transit network can affect the potential number of people who will ride. Because when a transit system maximizes access, it maximizes the likelihood that service is useful for any particular trip. And so maximizing access by transit improves access to economic opportunity for work, for improving education, for generally for personal freedom. It also tells us a lot about whether a transit system is helping support the value of investments in more walkable communities, because walkable communities are in particular places that benefit greatly from high access transit, and tells us a lot about the general functionality of the village, town, community, county that you're working in. The challenge any community faces is that the things that maximize access by transit are the things where are the approaches where we put the most frequent service where most people are, and would therefore concentrate service in the places that are highest densities of jobs and people. And so these two cartoon examples show us that if we wanted to maximize access overall on average, we would take the buses in this fictional community on the left and concentrate them in just the two corridors where all of these dots showing people and jobs are more concentrated, and have very frequent service to most people, but not all people in this community. And that's the thing that would maximize access on average, because most people would have really, really good access. They would have very short waits. They could transfer easily. They could get anywhere along these two routes very quickly, but not everyone would have service. All of that supports things like the reduction of emissions by getting more people to use transit and getting people out of cars, supporting denser development, reducing the subsidy per passenger potentially. It does not, however, do another thing that a lot of people want transit to do, which is get some service to everyone. If we're trying to get some kind of service to as many places, as many people as possible, that is the kind of thing we do when we're trying to maximize coverage. So on the right, we see the same 18 buses in this fictional town spread across 10 or more routes. And therefore, most of these routes are only coming perhaps once an hour. And so the service is much less useful for most people, and fewer people use this service. And we have lower ridership, but we have provided some kind of lifeline access to everyone. And that may be a really important value that people want us to achieve. And the challenge we face is that this set of conflicting priorities and goals is a geometric challenge that we can't avoid, but it's one that we can think about carefully and decide how much of our resources go to higher access, higher frequency, and higher ridership things, and how much of our resources go to higher coverage things. So in our concepts and choices report, we pointed out the existing network is about half going towards high ridership activities and about half towards high coverage services. And we showed the community two different options: a higher ridership concept where we put about 70% of resources towards higher frequency and higher ridership services, and about 30% towards coverage oriented services. And then a coverage concept where we split the resources to about 40% to high coverage and about 60% to high ridership, 40% to high ridership and 60% to high coverage. And asked, where should Suffolk County be on this spectrum? And we showed the community a range of outcomes. For example, these same kind of access bubbles that I showed in that cartoon before, in this particular example from Mechanicsville Road and Park Avenue in Bayshore, how far you can get in 60 minutes in the coverage concept, showing in the grayish blue area, all the areas you could reach before that you can still reach. In the dark gray areas, the areas you could reach before, but you could no longer reach if we implemented that concept. And the light blue areas, new areas you could reach. And in this case, the change was pretty minimal, but you saw a bit of an increase in how many jobs and people you could reach in 60 minutes because there is some new blue area on this map. In the ridership concept, you could see that the blue areas got much larger. So many new areas that could be reached in 60 minutes, and therefore many new jobs, 30,000 additional jobs, almost 31,000 additional jobs, and more than 91,000 additional people that could be reached from that location, which tells us a great deal about how useful transit would be for people who live near this area, and how useful transit would be for reaching that area for customers or workers who wanted to come to this part of Bayshore for work or shopping or all sorts of reasons. And we could average these numbers and look at them from across the county and see that the coverage concept increased access to jobs a little bit, about 13% for residents of color, and 14% for low-income residents and residents without cars. The ridership concept in the red bar drastically increased access to jobs by 49% for all residents and 63% for residents of color, which is, a significant improvement at the expense of the ridership concept didn't go everywhere. And therefore, not everyone who had service today would have it under that concept. And when we asked people their preference, when they could see what the trade-offs were between the higher ridership concept and the higher coverage concept, most respondents preferred the ridership concept. 60% strongly preferred or leaned towards the ridership concept. About 20% preferred or leaned towards the coverage concept. And about 20% said they were about halfway in between the two and what they would prefer to see the county do. So based on this feedback, the county decided that a draft recommendation should be between these two concepts, but closer in balance towards the ridership concept. And therefore, building on that, the draft recommended network would be about 65% oriented towards ridership and then 35% oriented towards coverage. So this is today's network, where it's about a 50-50 split. Important note in looking at this map of the existing network is that routes are color-coded by the frequency of service, which determines how long you have to wait. In red are routes that provide service every 30 minutes most of the day. In blue, dark blue, are routes that provide service every hour most of the day. And in light blue are routes that provide service less than every hour, every 75 minutes or every 90 minutes or worse. And at a high level, what you see in this network is only 3 significant 30-minute routes, with a small section of 60 and 76 providing 30-minute service between Port Jefferson and Stony Brook as a 4th corridor, but most service in the county coming every 60 minutes most of the day. So a lot of routes across much of the county, covering most people and jobs, but mostly at very low frequency. Also very high complex patterns with sometimes significant duplication between routes, providing a lot of one-seat rides at the expense of, therefore, providing less frequency, which was another thing we asked about at the concepts phase. Would you rather get somewhere soon, even if it meant a transfer, or would you prefer to have a one-seat ride, even if it meant it took a longer time to get there? And most people said they would prefer to get there faster, even if it meant a transfer. So based on all of that feedback, the draft recommended network, again, 65% of resources devoted towards ridership goals, 35% devoted to coverage goals. You see a significant consolidation of service into fewer routes, but more frequent routes that run every 30 minutes. So most routes on this map are every 30 minutes. You see a maintenance of some 60-minute routes to provide coverage along a number of key corridors, particularly longer distance corridors like Middle Country, or some north-south corridors like Highway 112. And you see 2 on-demand zones in the South Fork. One, a recommendation to continue the current pilot zone for the Southampton area up towards Sag Harbor. And you see a new recommendation for a on-demand zone covering East Hampton to Montauk. An important note is that both of those are recommended to be 7-day-a-week services, whereas today the pilot zone does not run all week. In this network, you see significantly improved services in a number of sections of the county, including to Stony Brook, with higher frequency service there, to Stony Brook up to Port Jefferson, higher frequency service to Gordon Heights, an improvement with a one-seat ride all the way to Amityville and from Patchogue with this Route 2 on Montauk Highway. More frequent service from Brentwood to Huntington Square and Northport VA Hospital on the new Route 7, which is similar in path to the current S41. And more frequent service from Patchogue to Massac on this Route 66. You also see things like Route 92 is still here hourly, or at least hourly at midday. Its path and frequency would remain the same, with some additional frequency at peak times and an improved timed connection between the 92 and the 66 and the 58 in Riverhead, so that all of those routes, particularly in the middle of the day and times when all are running hourly, would be able to meet and have that timed connection. An important point of difference, this is the existing network focused here on the western part of the county. There are many connection points in the existing network, but most of them are not timed connections. So you often have a long wait to transfer. When you think about that transfer time in particular, the average waiting time you experience if you just show up at a stop or you show up at a transfer point between routes, for a 90-minute route, which many of these light blue routes are, that's an average of a 45-minute wait. For the dark blue routes that are every 60 minutes, that's an average of a 30-minute wait. And for the red routes that are every 30 minutes, that's an average of a 15-minute wait. So that creates an enormous challenge in trying to connect many places across the county where you have long waits between routes that don't have timed connections today. So a big point of difference with this draft new network is not only improved frequency overall, which means less waiting for a lot of trips when you start your trip, but it also means with timed connections at Brentwood, Central Islip, Patchogue, Smith Haven Mall, and Riverhead, that if you're trying to transfer between most of these routes at those time transfer locations, you would have about a 3 to 5 minute wait, because the buses on all these routes would be timed to arrive and sit for a few minutes so that people could easily transfer between them without having to just miss a connection. Also included in the assumptions and work in developing this network is a lot of work to change the assumptions about how long it takes routes to travel across the county and across the street network. Today, the current schedules and timetables do not account for changes in traffic and congestion that have occurred over the last 10 to 20 years. And therefore, many routes run behind schedule quite often. This network includes additional resources to ensure that the routes would be running on time, and therefore these time connections would be much more reliable. Another element of improvement in this new network is consistency of service across the week. If we look, for example, at the network of routes that run on Sunday in the existing network, there are only 13 routes that operate on Sundays today, and they all run hourly. So many routes, many connections across the county are not available at all on Sundays. And many routes end very early in the evening during the week. The recommended network includes running service until almost 10 p.m. on most routes, and running all of the all-day routes that you see on the main network map on Sundays. So the network would basically be a 7-day-a-week network. The only fixed route in the recommended network that doesn't run on Sundays is the peak hour only Suffolk Clipper route, the S110. Everything else that runs all day would run 7 days a week. So there's a bit of additional investment in the network to provide that 7-day-a-week service. So how does this network compare in some of the key outcomes? One set of key outcomes is how many people are near transit, which is a measure of success on coverage terms. We can also look at how many people are near more frequent service every 30 minutes or better, which tells us a bit about how many people might find the new network particularly useful for more trips. So these bar charts are showing you the existing network, how many people on this top bar, how many residents in the county are near any transit service for the total of all three of these colored bars, which is about 70% are near any transit service in the county. And then 12% are near 30-minute or better service. And 51% are near service that's every 60 minutes. And 6% are near something that it comes less often than that. So relatively few people near more useful 30-minute service, and more than 2/3 near something. When we look at that for low-income residents, we see a similar pattern, about 75% near any service, only 14% near 30-minute or better service. Households without cars, again, about 75% near anything, but only 16% near something that comes 30 minutes or better. And residents of color, about 80% are near any service, but only 13% near something that comes every 30 minutes or better. And when we look at jobs, we see a little less than 80% are near any service, and about 25% are near service that comes every 30 minutes or better. You see jobs tend to perform better in terms of how many are near more frequent service, because jobs tend to be more concentrated in town centers and places where 30-minute routes converge today, or along Walt Whitman. If we look at the draft recommended network, we see a pretty consistent pattern between the comparisons, which is, in general, the total number of people, or percent of people near any service goes down because we are reducing coverage somewhat. But the percent of people near 30-minute service goes up dramatically. So for all residents, it's about 58% are near any service, but now 41% are near service that comes every 30 minutes or better. For low-income residents, about 65% are near any service, and 48%, almost half, are near 30-minute service. Similar pattern for households without cars and residents of color, and for jobs. So in general, about 30% of residents and jobs are near 60-minute service today and would be near 30-minute service in the future. So that's an enormous increase. But about 10% of residents and jobs are near some kind of service today, would no longer be near some service in the future. And that's the trade-off of that shift towards higher ridership and higher frequency in the split of resources between those goals. The other big measure we can look at is, how does the draft network change access to jobs and opportunity? So coming back to this example I showed before of Bayshore Mechanicsville Road at Park Avenue, from that point, you see all of the light blue area is new area you could reach that you can't reach today in 60 minutes of travel time. And in that area, there's 34,000 more jobs that you could reach, which is a 70% increase from today. And there's about 93,000 more residents, 34,000 more jobs, which is a 70% increase for residents as well. So that's a significant increase in this particular area. The draft network report has numerous additional examples that you can look at of different parts of the county to see how your community might be affected. And also, we have a summary of effectively doing that kind of analysis in places all across the county, and then summing it up into a heat map of the county. And in this heat map, showing areas in purple where access to jobs is going up, which is a good quantification of overall change in access to opportunity, and areas in orange showing where access to jobs may be going down because of changes in the network. And all of these hexagons on this map are sized by the number of people that live in them. So the larger, bigger hexagons are places where there are lots of people. The smaller, thinner ones are places where there are fewer people. And we see in Brentwood, Central Islip, near Amityville, and a lot of Babylon, big increases in job access. We do see some areas, for example, around Smithtown, around Sayville, around portions of 25A, where because of the reductions in coverage or places that might be much longer walks from service or so far that it's really not even walkable anymore to reach transit, there is a reduction in job access with this change in the network. When we summarize on average this change, we can see what's the average change overall across the county. Today, the average person in Suffolk County can reach about almost 18,000 jobs by transit and walking in 60 minutes. For the average resident, when we sum up across all the positives and all the negatives across the county, the average resident could reach about 26,000 jobs by walking in transit, which is a 48% increase. For residents of color, we see this new network would mean a 67% increase in the number of jobs reachable in 60 minutes. For low-income residents, a 59% increase, and for residents without cars, a 53% increase in the jobs reachable by transit and walking in 60 minutes. Now, that's the average. It's obviously very different, as I showed in that heat map. And at the website, Reimagine, Connect LI/Reimagine Transit, you can find a wealth of additional information, including this interactive map, which is a screenshot of the interactive map, where you can turn on and off the existing network and the draft new network. And you can compare where are routes today, where are routes in this recommended network. You can also turn on and off this access feature and click a point anywhere on the map and see how does the access change from where you live, from where you work, where you shop. Does it go up? Does it go down? By how much? And from this particular point in this screenshot I've taken, you can see that the light blue areas are the areas that you can reach that you couldn't reach before. And all told, that adds up to 31,000 more jobs that could be reachable from that particular location. So again, at connectli.org/rtdraftnewnetwork.html is the page with all of the details on the recommended draft recommended network, including this tool to allow you to explore your access and opportunity. So to sum up, the draft new network would have many more 30-minute routes, time connections between many routes at key locations like Central Islip and Patchogue and Riverhead, expanded hours of service on weekday evenings and on all routes running on Sunday, 2 on-demand transit zones to supplement the fixed route network. And overall, the network dramatically expands access to opportunity for most people in most places. And because of that, significantly expands the ridership potential for transit, for Suffolk County Transit. And so with that, we'd like